What happens when a single act of kindness puts you in the crosshairs of the city's most dangerous man? On a bitterly cold winter night, a struggling waitress gave her only winter coat to a shivering, lost little girl in a dark alley. She didn't know the child was the heir to a ruthless mafia empire. When the boss found his daughter wearing a stranger's coat, he didn't send a reward, he sent his enforcers. This is a story of terrifying misunderstandings, unbroken dignity, and the shocking twist that changed everything. The wind howled through the concrete canyons of Chicago, carrying with it a bitter, stinging sleet that felt like crushed glass against the skin. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Clara Evans was walking home. At 28, Clara possessed a quiet, enduring beauty, though lately it was hidden beneath dark circles of exhaustion. She had just finished a brutal 14-hour double shift at a downtown diner, a necessity to chip away at the crushing mountain of medical debt left behind by her late mother's illness. Clara pulled her heavy, mustard yellow wool coat tighter around her slender frame. It was a thrift store find, frayed at the cuffs and missing a button, but it was the warmest thing she owned. The streetlights flickered, casting long, erratic shadows across the snow-dusted pavement. As she took a shortcut through the narrow alley behind Miller's pharmacy, a faint, rhythmic sound broke through the howling wind. It wasn't the scuttle of a rat or the rustle of garbage. It was a whimper. Clara froze, her breath pluming in the freezing air. She hesitated, her survival instincts urging her to keep walking. The alleys of this neighborhood were not safe after dark, but the sound came again, a small, fragile sob that shattered her resolve. Cautiously, Clara stepped deeper into the shadows. Behind a rusted dumpster, huddled in a patch of dirty snow, was a child. She couldn't have been older than 7. She was wearing a beautiful, delicate velvet dress that was entirely inappropriate for the brutal winter weather. She had no coat, no gloves, and only one small Mary Jane shoe. Her dark, curly hair was plastered to her tear-stained cheeks by the sleet, and her lips were a terrifying shade of blue. "Oh my God," Clara gasped, dropping her purse. She fell to her knees, ignoring the icy slush seeping through her jeans. "Sweetheart? Hey, look at me. What are you doing out here?" The little girl looked up, her large, terrified brown eyes meeting Clara's. Her teeth were chattering so violently she could barely speak. I got lost. The bad men. They chased my driver. I ran." Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. Bad men? Driver? The implications were terrifying, but the immediate danger was the cold. The child was slipping into hypothermia. Clara could see it in the sluggishness of her blinks. There was no time to search for police, no time to wait for an ambulance. Without a second thought, Clara stripped off her heavy mustard yellow coat. The biting wind instantly sliced through her thin diner uniform, sending a violent shiver down her spine, but she ignored it. She wrapped the oversized, thick wool coat around the little girl's trembling shoulders, pulling the lapels tight to trap whatever body heat remained. "What's your name, sweetie?" Clara asked softly, rubbing the girl's small, freezing arms through the thick fabric. "Lucia," the girl whispered, burying her face into the collar of the coat. It smelled of vanilla and cheap diner coffee, but to Lucia, it smelled like safety. "Okay, Lucia, my name is Clara. I'm going to run to the main street, right there, to wave down a police car. I will be right back. Do not move from this spot, okay? The coat will keep you warm." Lucia nodded weakly. Clara stood up, the agonizing cold already turning her fingers numb. She sprinted toward the mouth of the alley, scanning the deserted avenue for headlights. She was gone for exactly 2 minutes. When a patrol car finally rounded the corner, Clara frantically waved it down and led the skeptical officers back into the alley. But when they reached the dumpster, the space was empty. The snow was trampled by heavy boots, but Lucia was gone. The only trace left behind was a single, expensive velvet hair ribbon lying in the slush. Panic seized Clara's chest. The officers took her statement, dismissing it as a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, or perhaps a runaway who had bolted again. Shivering uncontrollably, her teeth chattering, Clara walked the remaining 3 miles to her rundown apartment in just her thin uniform, praying the little girl in her coat was safe. She had no idea the earthquake she had just set in motion. 10 miles away, in a sprawling, heavily fortified estate overlooking the lake, the atmosphere was a suffocating blend of panic and rage. Dante Marino stood in the center of his mahogany-paneled study, a glass of untouched bourbon in his hand. Dante was a man carved from marble and violence. At 35, he was the undisputed head of the Marino Syndicate, a criminal empire that controlled the city's ports and underground gambling rings. He was ruthless, calculating, and feared by politicians and criminals alike. But tonight, Dante Marino was just a terrified father. 3 hours ago, the armored SUV carrying his daughter, Lucia, and her nanny had been ambushed. His men had found the vehicle shot up, the driver dead, the nanny unconscious. But Lucia had vanished. Dante had mobilized every soldier, every bribed cop, and every informant in the city. The streets were crawling with his men. He was ready to burn Chicago to the ground to get her back. The heavy oak doors of the study burst open. His underboss, a scarred man named Silvio, stood breathless in the doorway. "Boss, we found her. She's safe." Dante dropped the glass. It shattered against the Persian rug, the expensive liquor seeping into the fibers. He didn't care. He shoved past Silvio, sprinting down the grand hallway toward the medical wing of the estate. When he burst into the room, his heart nearly stopped. Lucia was sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, a private physician checking her vitals. She was pale, exhausted, but completely unharmed, and wrapped tightly around her small body was a hideous, cheap, mustard yellow women's coat. "Lucia," Dante breathed, his voice cracking as he fell to his knees, pulling his daughter into a desperate embrace. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her, assuring himself she was real. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm okay, Papa," Lucia whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I ran away from the bad men when the car stopped. I hid in the dark." Dante pulled back, his dark eyes hardening as they scanned her. Then, his gaze fell on the yellow coat. The fabric was coarse, the stitching poor. It was an insult to the Marino name, but more importantly, it was an anomaly. "Where did you get this?" Dante asked, his voice low, the Mafia boss taking over the father. "An angel gave it to me," Lucia said innocently. "She found me freezing. She gave me her coat and went to get the police. But then Silvio's men found me and put me in the car before she came back." Dante's jaw tightened. An angel? In his world, there were no angels. There were only angles, leverages, and traps. A random civilian giving up their coat in freezing weather? It didn't make sense. Paranoia, the very trait that had kept him alive this long, began to whisper in his ear. Was the woman a scout for the rival Thorn cartel? Was she trying to gain Lucia's trust? Was the coat laced with a tracker? Or worse, poison? "Take the coat off," Dante commanded. A maid quickly stepped forward, gently slipping the heavy wool garment off Lucia's shoulders. Dante snatched it from the maid's hands. He inspected it like a bomb technician. He plunged his hands into the pockets. In the right pocket, his fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. He pulled it out. It was a dry cleaning receipt from a cheap laundromat on the south side. At the top, scrawled in faded blue ink, was a name, C. Evans. There was also a punch card for a diner, Maggie's Diner. Dante's eyes narrowed into dark, dangerous slits. He turned to Silvio, holding up the receipt. "Find this." "C. Evans," Dante ordered, his voice cold as ice. "I want to know everything. Who she works for, who she sleeps with, and who paid her to get close to my daughter. And when you find her, bring her in. Nobody touches my family without me knowing exactly why." Silvio nodded grimly. "Consider it done, boss." As the door closed, Dante looked back at his daughter, who was now drinking hot cocoa, oblivious to the storm brewing. Dante Marino did not believe in coincidences. This, C. Evans was going to pay for playing games with his daughter's life. Clara awoke with a violent start. Her tiny, one-bedroom apartment was freezing. The radiator hissed weakly, fighting a losing battle against the winter draft, seeping through the cracked window pane. She pulled her thin blanket up to her chin, shivering violently. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and her head pounded with the onset of a severe fever. Giving up her coat had cost her dearly. She rolled over, glancing at the glowing red numbers on her alarm clock. It was 2:15 a.m., 2 nights after the incident in the alley. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the small space. The front door of her apartment was kicked violently off its hinges, the wood splintering inward. Clara screamed, throwing her hands over her face as heavy, booted footsteps flooded into her living room. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, blinding her. "Clear the back. Check the closets," a gruff voice barked. Clara scrambled back against the headboard, pulling the blanket tight around her trembling body. 4 massive men in dark tactical gear stood in her bedroom, their expressions hidden by shadows, but the heavy steel of suppressed handguns was clearly visible in their hands. "Get up," one of them commanded, grabbing Clara by the arm and hauling her out of bed. She hit the cold linoleum floor barefoot, gasping in pain as her knees bruised. "Please, take whatever you want," Clara cried, tears of sheer terror springing to her eyes. "I don't have any money." The men didn't answer. They simply shoved her into the small living room. The cheap furniture had been flipped, her few books scattered across the floor. Standing in the center of the chaos, bathed in the pale light of the street lamp outside, was a man who looked like he belonged to another world entirely. Dante Marino wore a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Clara's life insurance. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes, dark, bottomless, and utterly ruthless, were fixed entirely on her. He held the mustard yellow coat casually in one hand. "Clara Evans," Dante said, his voice a smooth, lethal baritone. It wasn't a question. Clara swallowed hard, her chest heaving. Yes. Who are you? What is this?" Dante slowly stepped forward, tossing the yellow coat onto the floor at her feet. "I am the father of the girl you found in the alley." Relief, swift and powerful, washed over Clara's face, momentarily overriding her fear. "Oh, thank God. She's safe?" "I came back with the police, but she was gone." "I've been so worried." Dante's expression didn't soften. Instead, he pulled a sleek silver handgun from his holster and casually aimed it at her chest. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Save the performance," Dante sneered. "Who gave you the order? Was it Thorne? Or the Russians? Did you think you could play the savior, get close to my daughter, and I wouldn't notice?" Clara stared at the gun, her mind racing to comprehend the insanity of the accusation. "What? Order? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a waitress who just happens to stumble upon the most valuable target in the city in a dark alley at 3 in the morning." Dante stepped closer, his imposing figure towering over her. "You gave her your coat to track her. Where is the bug? Or were you just the spotter?" Anger, sudden and fierce, cut through Clara's terror. She had spent her entire life playing by the rules, enduring hardship with quiet grace, and taking care of others. To be standing in her own destroyed home, freezing, sick, and accused of a monstrous crime by a man holding a gun on her, snapped something deep inside her. Clara pushed herself up off the floor. She stood tall, though she was shaking from the fever and the cold. She looked directly into the barrel of the gun, and then up into Dante's cold eyes. "I am a waitress," Clara said, her voice shaking but her tone laced with absolute defiance. "I work 14 hours a day. I barely make rent. I found a terrified, freezing child in an alley. I gave her my coat because I am a human being and she was going to die. I didn't know who she was, and looking at you now, I am incredibly sorry for her that she belongs to a monster like you." The room went dead silent. Silvio and the other men tensed, waiting for Dante to pull the trigger. No one spoke to Dante Marino like that. Dante stared at her. He searched her eyes for the lie, for the deception, for the trained calm of a cartel spy. But all he saw was a sick, exhausted woman radiating raw indignation and truth. Her cheeks were flushed with a genuine fever. Her apartment was a genuine testament to poverty. Dante slowly lowered the gun. A strange, unfamiliar feeling flickered in his chest. Doubt. Tear the place apart. Leave no floorboard unchecked. Dante ordered his men, never breaking eye contact with Clara. If you find nothing, we leave. They spent another 20 minutes destroying her meager belongings. They found nothing but overdue medical bills and cheap instant ramen. Dante stood by the door, watching Clara wrap her arms around herself, shivering violently as her fever spiked. If I find out you're lying, Miss Evans, Dante said coldly, turning to leave, there won't be a door for me to kick down next time. They left as quickly as they came, leaving Clara alone in the freezing, shattered ruins of her life. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in misery for Clara. The midnight raid had not gone unnoticed. Her landlord, an anxious man who wanted no trouble, had seen the armed men in the hallway. By noon the next day, Clara was handed a 30-day eviction notice, accompanied by a demand to vacate immediately if she didn't want the police involved. Things worsened at the diner. Word traveled fast in the neighborhood, and her boss, terrified of gang affiliations, fired her on the spot. I can't have cartel heat in my restaurant, Clara. I'm sorry, he had mumbled, refusing to look her in the eye. Clara was utterly broken. Her fever had worsened into a severe chest infection, a direct result of walking home in the sleet without her coat. She spent her days coughing violently, packing her ruined belongings into cardboard boxes and counting the few crumpled dollar bills she had left. She had done the right thing, the moral thing, and the universe had rewarded her with total destruction. Meanwhile, back at the Marino estate, a different kind of storm was brewing. Lucia was safe, but the brief exposure to the cold in the alley had taken its toll. The little girl had developed a nasty bout of pneumonia. For days, she lay in her grand, silk-sheeted bed, coughing and running a high fever. Dante barely left her side, conducting his ruthless business from an armchair in her room. But something was bothering him. Lucia kept asking for the angel. "Papa," Lucia whispered one evening, her voice raspy. "Did you find Clara? Did you give her coat back? She must be so cold." Dante looked at his daughter, guilt suddenly piercing his hardened heart like a sniper's bullet. "Rest, Lucia. I handled it." "She saved me, Papa," Lucia insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "She wasn't a bad person. She was crying because I was crying. You have to help her." Dante left the room, his jaw clenched tight. He walked to his study and summoned Silvio. "What happened to the woman? Clara Evans?" Dante asked, pouring a drink he actually intended to consume this time. Silvio shifted uncomfortably. "Well, boss, she's not doing great. Our little visit spooked the neighborhood. Her landlord kicked her out. She lost her job at the diner. My guys have been keeping tabs just in case. And she's sick, really sick, coughing up blood, looks like. She's got no money for a doctor." Dante stopped mid-pour. The whiskey bottle clinked against the crystal glass. He had destroyed the life of an innocent woman. A woman who had saved his daughter's life at the expense of her own health. He, a man who prided himself on absolute justice within his syndicate, had acted like a tyrant. "She wasn't a spy," Dante said quietly, the realization settling heavily on his shoulders. "No, boss. Just a civilian. We ran her background top to bottom. She's clean. Drowning in her dead mother's hospital bills." Dante looked out the window at the frozen lake. He remembered Clara's face, pale and defiant, looking down the barrel of his gun and calling him a monster. She had been right. "Get the car," Dante ordered sharply, "and call Dr. Eris. Have a room prepped in the medical wing." "Who are we picking up, boss?" Silvio asked. "We are picking up Miss Evans," Dante replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And we are going to fix this." Clara was carrying her last box of belongings to her rusted, 10-year-old sedan parked on the street. It was a bleak, gray afternoon. Her chest rattled with every breath she took, and she felt lightheaded, running on nothing but tap water and a fading will to survive. She was planning to sleep in her car tonight. She paused on the corner of 5th and Elm, leaning against a brick wall to catch her breath. Across the street, a sleek, black town car pulled up to the curb in front of an upscale bakery. Clara wiped a sheen of cold sweat from her forehead and glanced over. Her heart skipped a beat. Stepping out of the town car, accompanied by 2 massive bodyguards, was the little girl, Lucia. She was bundled in a luxurious white fur coat, looking pale but happy. A bittersweet smile touched Clara's lips. At least the child was safe. At least her sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. Clara turned to walk away, wanting nothing to do with the Mafia world that had ruined her. But then, the screech of tires shattered the afternoon quiet. A gray van sped around the corner, hopping the curb and slamming into the back of the town car. The doors of the van slid open, and 4 masked men carrying automatic weapons poured out. It was a targeted hit by Victor Thorne, Dante's biggest rival, making a second play for the Merino heir. Chaos erupted. Civilians screamed and dove for cover. The 2 bodyguards drew their weapons and returned fire, pushing Lucia behind the armored door of the town car. But they were outgunned. One bodyguard went down instantly, a spray of red painting the snow. The second was pinned behind the hood, desperately laying down cover fire. Lucia was trapped, crying hysterically, huddled near the back tire of the car, completely exposed from the side angle of the advancing gunman. Clara didn't think. The survival instincts that told her to run were completely overridden by a primal protective surge. She was a woman who had lost everything, but she could not watch a child die. "Lucia," Clara screamed. She sprinted across the street, diving into the active war zone. Bullets sparked against the pavement, shattering the bakery windows. Clara reached the town car, grabbing Lucia by the waist and pulling her violently to the ground, shielding the child's small body with her own. "Clara!" Lucia sobbed, recognizing her instantly despite the chaos. "Stay down. Cover your ears." Clara yelled over the deafening roar of gunfire. One of the masked men saw them. He raised his rifle, aiming directly at Clara's back. Suddenly, a convoy of black SUVs roared onto the street. Dante Marino had arrived. His soldiers flooded the street, a tidal wave of precision and violence that overwhelmed Thorne's men in seconds. But it was a second too late. The gunman fired. A searing, white-hot agony ripped through Clara's left shoulder. The force of the impact threw her forward, slamming her head against the icy pavement. The world spun out of focus, the sounds of gunfire fading into a dull ringing. Through her blurring vision, Clara saw Dante sprinting toward her, his face contorted in a mask of absolute terror and rage. He slid to his knees on the bloody snow, pulling his crying daughter into one arm and pressing his other hand firmly against the bleeding wound on Clara's shoulder. "Hold on," Dante's voice echoed, sounding panicked, human, desperate. "Look at me, Clara. Stay with me. You don't get to die today." Clara tried to speak, to tell him to make sure Lucia was okay, but the darkness was too heavy. She closed her eyes, the bitter cold finally fading away into nothing. When Clara opened her eyes, she was not in heaven, nor was she in her freezing apartment. She was lying in a massive, sunlit room, wrapped in sheets that felt like spun silk. The steady, reassuring beep of a heart monitor echoed softly. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her shoulder forced her back down with a gasp. "Don't move. The bullet passed clean through, but you lost a lot of blood. Plus, your lungs were in terrible shape from the pneumonia." Clara turned her head. Sitting in a chair beside the bed, looking exhausted and stripped of his usual intimidating aura, was Dante Marino. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing intricate tattoos. "Where am I?" Clara croaked, her throat dry. "My home." "The private medical wing," Dante said softly, pouring a glass of water and holding it to her lips. She drank greedily. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." Clara leaned back, processing the information. "Lucia? She is entirely unharmed," Dante said, his voice dropping an octave, thick with emotion. "Because of you, twice now, you have saved what is most precious to me, and twice, I have repaid you with suffering." Dante leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The ruthless crime lord was gone. In his place was a man deeply burdened by his own sins. "I investigated you, Clara. After that night, in your apartment, I saw what my paranoia did to your life. I was coming to find you, to make it right, when Thorne's men ambushed my daughter. You had every reason to walk away. You had every reason to hate me and let my world burn. Why didn't you? Clara looked at him, her eyes steady despite the pain medication fogging her brain. Because a child's life isn't a bargaining chip. I didn't save her for you, Dante. I saved her for her. No one deserves to be collateral damage in your wars. Dante flinched at the honesty. You called me a monster that night in your apartment. You are, Clara said quietly, lacking the energy to lie. You surround yourself with wealth and power, but you bring death to everything you touch. You almost got your own daughter killed, and if you don't change, eventually, one of those bullets will hit her. Silence hung heavy in the room. In Dante's world, men had been tortured and killed for saying much less. But Dante just nodded slowly, the truth of her words piercing him deeper than any blade. I know, he whispered. He stood up, walking to the window, overlooking the estate. My father built this syndicate. I inherited the violence. I thought controlling it was enough to keep my family safe. I was wrong. He turned back to her, pulling a thick envelope from his pocket and placing it on the nightstand. There is $2 million in that envelope. Clean, untraceable money. A new passport. The deed to a house in a quiet town in Colorado. When you are healed, you can leave. You will never have to worry about rent or hospital bills or the cold ever again. Clara looked at the envelope. It was everything she had ever prayed for. It was freedom. I don't want your blood money, Clara said firmly, pushing the envelope away. Dante looked genuinely shocked. Clara, please, it's not a bribe. It's an apology. It's money earned through extortion and violence, Clara countered, her moral compass unyielding, even in the face of immense wealth. If I take it, I become part of the sickness. I want my dignity, Dante. I want a fair job. And I want you to look at your daughter and ask yourself what kind of legacy you are leaving her. Dante stared at the woman in his bed. She had nothing. She was battered, bruised, and broken by his world. Yet she held more power in her quiet integrity than he did with an army of men. She was untouchable. You are an extraordinary woman, Clara Evans, Dante murmured. I'm just a waitress, she replied. Not anymore, Dante promised, a profound shift occurring behind his dark eyes. 6 months later, the Chicago underworld was unrecognizable. Victor Thorne was gone, not killed, but systematically dismantled and handed over to the federal authorities on a silver platter of perfectly curated evidence. Dante Marino had executed the most ruthless, bloodless coup in the city's history. He hadn't just removed his enemies, he had removed himself. The Marino syndicate had rapidly divested from narcotics, extortion, and illegal gambling. Dante poured his immense resources into legitimate logistics, real estate, and shipping. It cost him half his fortune and the loyalty of some of his oldest capos, but Dante didn't care. He was a man awake. It was a warm spring afternoon when Clara walked into the lobby of the newly constructed Marino Tower downtown. She wasn't wearing a thin diner uniform anymore. She wore a tailored, elegant navy blue pantsuit. Her shoulders were healed, her cheeks full of color, and her eyes bright with purpose. She took the elevator to the penthouse level, stepping into a massive, sunlit office. Dante was sitting behind a glass desk, reviewing contracts. He looked up, and a genuine, warm smile broke across his usually stoic face. Clara, he said, standing up to greet her. You're late. The contractors for the South Side shelter were arguing about plumbing fixtures. I had to mediate, she replied, taking a seat across from him. Clara had refused his dirty money, so Dante had done something entirely unexpected. He took the $2 million, added $10 million more of his clean, newly legitimized funds, and established the Evans Foundation, a massive charity dedicated to providing housing, medical care, and winter clothing to the city's homeless and at-risk youth. And he had made Clara the CEO. You handled them, I assume? Dante asked, leaning back, watching her with a deep, profound respect. It wasn't purely romantic, though there was an undeniable, simmering tension between them. It was a reverence. She was his true north. Of course, Clara smiled. I just channeled my inner Mafia boss, told them if they didn't finish by next week, I'd make them wear a mustard yellow coat in a blizzard. Dante chuckled, a rich, rare sound. Speaking of which, he reached under his desk and pulled out a beautifully wrapped box, sliding it across the glass to her. Clara opened it carefully. Inside, folded neatly, was a brand new, exquisite wool coat. It was a beautiful, deep mustard yellow, tailored perfectly to her size, with gold buttons and a soft silk lining. Clara ran her hand over the soft fabric, tears pricking her eyes. "Dante, you didn't have to. You gave up your warmth for my family," Dante said softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "It's my job to make sure you never feel cold again." Just then, the office doors burst open. Lucia, now 8 years old and glowing with health, ran into the room, throwing her arms around Clara's neck. "Clara, Papa said we could go get ice cream after your meeting." Lucia beamed. Clara hugged the little girl tight, looking over Lucia's shoulder at the man who had once pointed a gun at her chest. He was no longer a monster. He was just a father, a man who had been dragged out of the dark by the sheer unyielding light of one woman's kindness. Clara smiled, standing up and slipping on her new coat. It fit perfectly. "Ice cream sounds wonderful," Clara said. They walked out of the office together, not as a cartel boss and a victim, but as a family forged in the crucible of a freezing winter night, a testament to the fact that even the darkest empires can be brought to their knees by a single selfless act of love. Thank you for listening to this incredible journey of Clara and the Marino family. This story reminds us that true power doesn't come from fear, wealth, or violence, but from the quiet resilience of a pure heart and the courage to do what is right, no matter the cost. Kindness is a light that can pierce even the darkest of underworlds. If Clara's unwavering dignity and Dante's ultimate redemption inspired you, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping, emotional stories just like this one. Drop a comment below telling us what you would have done in Clara's shoes. Stay safe, stay kind, and we'll see you next time.